The Charleston County Criminal Justice Coordinating Council is making great strides with a strategic plan that was launched 2 years ago. Today, I talk one-on-one with the project director of the council, Kristy Danford, for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Kristy Danford, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be back.
Well, I appreciate it greatly. Obviously, you are the project director of the Charleston County Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, and I know that the council in 2020 released a strategic plan outlining key initiatives for the next 3 years. The plan was developed on the heels of the CJCC's efforts in 2019 to engage and involve over 1,200 community members in setting the plan's course. What's changed with that plan, of course?
It continues to move forward. It is 2 years in, about at the 2-year mark of a 3-year plan. All of the initiatives are moving forward according to plan. Several of them have actually already been achieved. And there's really these opportunities for next level efforts. So the CJCC is in a good place.
Yeah, and I know 4 collaborative working groups of community representatives and justice system leaders developed a dozen initiatives for the next 3 years, drawing upon identified community priorities, system trends, and more recent lessons learned, COVID-19 and the growing movement for racial justice. What are the community priorities right now?
Well, the CJCC's been working in areas around community engagement and advancing equity. Been working in areas of diversion and deflection, so how to deflect people away from the system when the criminal justice system is not the right place, or how to divert people out so they don't fall deeper into it when it's not necessary. And also looking at those that are coming in to our jail that are getting arrested, what's happening next in bond court and through the reentry process, sort of how are folks faring during that state while they're waiting for court. And then the other focus, the really big focus, is on case processing. And in our world, it's the time from arrest to the disposition of charge. And the idea, really sort of thinking at the front end of the system, what can we do to make the system be more effective, more efficient, and more equitable? And all of that is yielding important information and good results, and also hopefully steering the ship eventually towards the opportunity to do more post-disposition. Once the judge has ruled and whatever the result is, if someone's convicted, what happens next?
And I want to talk more about that in depth a little bit later in the interview. But let me ask you, with that, what system trends do you all see right now in 2021?
So we're still seeing, a persistent pattern where lower level minor charges that don't need to go to jail aren't coming to jail, like open container, simple possession of marijuana, charges that used to be most frequently booked and were also found to disparately impact the Black community. What we're seeing now coming to our jail is a consistent pattern of general sessions charges, so charges headed to the circuit court. They have stayed relatively steady. The jail population itself is increasing. The folks that are there are often there for quite a long time, charged on serious offenses and waiting for their day in court. The majority of our local jail population are individuals awaiting court, and most of them, nearly a very large majority of them, are awaiting court in general sessions, and their average length of stay, is quite high as they're waiting for the courts to move forward with the cases.
Now, how many general session charges were there in 2021?
I can look it up really quick. It's been well so far this year. I can pull that up in a second. But what we've seen basically with local jail use is you've seen the lower level charges dip, and you've seen the general session charges stay relatively steady. And that's just a decision to use jail differently. And what we also looked at in our 2021 annual report, we compared Charleston County crime trends with the rest of the state. And while we've had these significant changes in jail use and ways of trying to make our system work better, we haven't experienced differential crime trends than the rest of the state. It just goes to show a lot more impacts crime, than these local level policy decisions would. So there's more to be had, but the time to disposition is really a big factor because the amount of time it takes to reach disposition, you have more opportunity for things to happen. So we want improve pretrial outcomes while lowering the time that it takes to bring those cases to their ultimate resolution.
And what's usually the average time for that, Kristy?
So it's been increasing. In 2021, our median time to disposition for all charges in circuit court was up to 592 days. Now that's the median time. So half of the charges that disposed were faster and half took longer. And that number's been climbing, and it's up about 6 months from what it was back in 2015 when it was 415 days.
Yes, ma'am. And talk to me about those crime trends. How do you compare that to, say, Georgetown County?
We looked within the context of the state as a whole. We compared Charleston County to the statewide totals. So we didn't compare any one county to any other county. And there's also larger studies going on around the country too. I mean, there are, upticks in certain kinds of crime, and there continue to be decreases in other kinds of crime. So these are significant issues. They're affecting everybody. And, there's, in our state, one of the big factors that we have is just how slow it takes to move a case through the system. And we've studied, we have a small number of individuals relative to the whole that are getting arrested, going to jail, getting out. And that small number of individuals is perpetually reoffending. And the longer that takes to bring their first, second, or third case to disposition, the worse off it is for everybody. And that's really where that sort of laser-like focus is coming, more and more into focus for the body and hopefully the community.
Now, where exactly have those upticks been in crimes in Charleston County?
I don't have that information specifically handy at the moment, but I can pull it up.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's crime trends, and there's what we choose to do as people that work in the system or community representatives that work within CJCC. And as we're looking at, for instance, how many people release pretrial out of our jail, right? Most people release. What we consistently have seen year over year over year, those released on financial bonds perform worse than those released on their own recognizance. We also see, when we provide the court with, objective information so they can use it when they're making those very fast decisions within 24 hours of arrest. Right. They have the objective information, they have the rap sheet, they can hear from the state or victims, they can hear from the defense, and right. It can be the adversarial, meaningful hearing. When we look at the folks that score on the lower risk level, 83% are successful. They make it to court, they don't get in trouble. 83%. When we go all the way up the scale to our higher risk level, we see 45% are successful and 55% are not. That's the group we're really concerned about. There's much more to be had there, and where we need options in our state that we don't currently have and we haven't had. And those options can include all the way up to the use of detention when it's necessary with appropriate due process. We have a false reliance on the idea of a money bond. At every level of risk, money bonds perform worse than the release on recognizance bonds. So our whole system of bond and release and reentry and the time it takes to then go to disposition, that's a huge issue. We have provided a very strong evidence base from what we've been looking at here in Charleston. And I'm hopeful that can help to shape a bigger conversation where legislative or judicial or constitutional work needs to happen to help improve the options for safety and justice for everybody.
Now, those low risk levels, what were those in 2021?
So the most recent study we looked at goes back a little farther. It's a sample of about 6,200 bond settings, and within that we see about 92% release, and the overwhelming majority score in the lower half of the risk levels. So about 72% of the defendants that get released are a level 1 or a level 2, so the lower half of risk levels. The remaining 28% are in a level 3 or a level 4, and they have lower success rates.
Wow. And where's that level trend heading towards in the next 5 years?
I honestly, they haven't shifted much since we've been doing it. Most folks do just fine when they're released.
Yes.
It's the small number that don't, and it's not that they just don't do it once. On average, they can get rearrested more than once, and that's not that's not okay. And that's where we really need to have some more work done. And we actually commissioned a study to dig deeper into the individual case and system characteristics. Sort of what's perpetuating those problems. It's of course the decisions and behaviors of the individuals themselves. It's also where are the opportunities in the system where we can be and should have better options to deal with that. One of which could be hurry up and dispose the first time the crime happens. And whatever supportive options all the way up to and including the need for the use of detention when it's necessary.
It's necessary. And let me ask you, what are those particular characteristics that are in front and center right now?
So pending charges is a big deal. When folks are coming through and they already have pending charges and they're racking up more pending charges, that's a really big deal. Thankfully, it's not a large number, but it's a problematic issue that really needs to be addressed and focused in a strategic manner. And that's what that research is pointing us to do, and also hopefully contributing to a larger conversation and how that works statewide.
Now, what will that conversation be after this research?
Well, there's sort of two simultaneous issues, right? One is we have a backlog of charges yet to be disposed in the circuit court, and we know those historically take a long time. We also know from our research, when we look at the charges in the last 4 years, less than 1% are trial-related dispositions, meaning 99% are not going to an actual trial, right? The majority are either pleading guilty or dismissing for some reason. So unpacking that is a big issue, right? Like, why are we clogging our system with things that may get dismissed anyway? And how can we focus the resources we have in a way that's going to better target safety and justice?
And what exactly are those current resources?
Prosecution, defense, court time, all the above, moving evidence from law enforcement to prosecution, out to defense, having actual appearances, status conferences, whatever needs to happen to move these charges along so that they can reach their ultimate disposition, whatever that may be. But also looking systemically where there are opportunities to say, hey, these charges are often getting dismissed, so let's get some feedback back to law enforcement. It's the situation is everybody's part of it, but we also have to rely on effective administration of the different tentacles, right? Whether that is the court docket, the prioritization of effort in prosecution and defense. There's a lot of opportunity there to recognize that we have a broken system and we need to work together to fix it.
And what feedback are you getting to the law enforcement thus far?
I think the biggest one was really a report that the solicitor's office released, looking at disparity in prosecution, and having this opportunity to do a pilot between the solicitor's office and the Charleston Police Department to do early screening of cases. That's an area where, personally, if a small policy change could make a huge world of difference, where you have prosecution get involved much earlier to decide whether or not to proceed with prosecution quickly, which also can give feedback back to law enforcement and say, hey, when X, Y, or Z piece of evidence would be helpful, or this wasn't a really good case to begin with, so the next time they bring a better one. That's an iterative process that if it happens faster, it doesn't clog the system as much, and it doesn't harm lives, while they're awaiting, whatever, if it's the victim or the defendant.
Yes,
so that's a neat pilot that I think is going to yield some really important fruit for justice, as well as hopefully some policy work in the future.
Now, what cases currently are in the criminal justice system, Kristy, that are really clogging the system up, in addition to these backlogs?
Well, the majority of our pending caseload are drug and weapon charges. So there's a lot to unpack there. And some of these things, the solicitor's office has made really good strides with a lot of this. And there have been, some efforts to clean up some old cases, but historically, our top, sort of biggest volume have been drug and gun cases.
Wow. Now, how many old cases are the solicitor's office trying to really, take care of right now?
Let me pull that up real quick. So we're typically sitting, and these are just ballpark numbers, but we're typically sitting on about 14,000 charges and about 7,000 defendants awaiting court.
Oh.
A defendant can, as we know, can have multiple charges. So that's, and those numbers, we've been tracking them. We've been doing projections on a quarterly basis to sort of keep looking at, if our pace of case movement continues, how many, just to dispose of what we currently have, how long is that going to take? And in that time, how many new cases are going to accrue? So the good news is at the end of 2020, the projections were looking very grim. They have improved considerably to where we are now, where they're starting to chip away more and more. And instead of looking at more growth, we're starting to see a decline in the backlog. Our clearance rates, which is sort of the rate of how many new charges we're bringing in relative to how many are being disposed of in the circuit, in Charleston County circuit, has been improving, a good bit. And a lot of that has been cleaning up old cases. So our initial accrual projection of how many new cases we expected at the slow pace during COVID by the end of 2020, was over 18,000 estimated. The most recent quarterly projection is down to 10,000. So, we've made some, the work of the solicitor and defense, really have helped to bring that forward, but there's just more need for strategic collaboration across everything. Whether it's docket management, law enforcement, prosecution, defense, everybody has a role to play.
And when did the CJCC see the decline in the backlogs?
The biggest we turned the curve since the end of 2020. I mean, there was a little bump in the third quarter of 21, and it's been coming down consistently since.
Wow.
And a lot of that is, having, going back to court. The court was shut down, for a long time, and that makes a really big difference. So like I said, the projections are improving. We sort of crossed that curve where it was getting more cases coming in than we're disposing, and now we flipped that where thankfully we appear to be disposing of more than are coming in, and that's good news.
Oh yeah, and how many of those have been disposed?
Well, they're still focusing on older cases, so the median time continues to tick up. But the good news is they're clearing out some old noise that really shouldn't be on the docket anyway. And these are lives, and the longer that it takes, the more harm it can do, and that's really, why, I would argue, I'm excited for the pilot, the work that's going on for the earlier screening, because that can really minimize harm to everybody and help figure out, what really belongs in the system, and let's use our resources to bring about justice where it's needed.
And what really belongs in the system today, Kristy?
I mean, a crime is a crime, and I think that, and those are important. What we think about where to spend the resources, we've got to put safety first, and that's, is safety, somebody charged with murder with clear and compelling evidence, or is safety, somebody walking downtown with an open can of beer? Those are, where would you rather the resources be spent?
Oh, I lost you there for a second. Oh, there you go. Okay. And let me ask you this. I know you talked about it a little bit earlier, but what are the current community impacts when it comes to diversion and deflection?
So that's been going well, and actually we just completed a study. There'll be a presentation on it in the July CJCC meeting, looking at diversion and deflection and some important valuable lessons learned there that are helping to shape, different, kind of removing some of the barriers to getting into, let's say, the Tri-County Crisis Stabilization Center, trying to make it, a no wrong door and make it easy access so people that are in need of help can get it without having unnecessary barriers put in the way, and hopefully get it before law enforcement even has to get involved.
And how many barriers have COVID made as a result of this?
COVID shut down the unit for a while for the Crisis Stabilization Center, and then it, reduced the numbers they could serve because of spatial limitations. It also, went from the ability to do police drop-offs to not being able to do police drop-offs because of a requirement for a COVID test. So there's been all sorts of barriers, and that has been a challenge. But they've been, continuing to work together to figure that out and to remove some of those barriers. And now, thankfully, it's safer to do so. And then, there are just opportunities galore. One of the initiatives the CJCC undertook was Most Visible Persons. Looking into the jail population to see who are these individuals that are churning through the most, right? And these are folks that are, may have a chronic illness, may be without a home, and they're coming in and out frequently on low level, sort of crimes against public order type charges. So there has been a concerted effort to work with the most visible, to try to engage them in some wraparound services and supports, and the understanding that, there's not this big, it's not just to throw money at the issue. It's let's see what the system gaps are so that we can more thoughtfully use the resources we have to uncover and try to find better ways to do that, not just for this most visible, but ideally in time, systemically for all. And that was a great thing. That was a neat opportunity that we were able to leverage to get another grant here called the Just Home Project. Right. And it is really to disrupt that perpetual cycle of jail and homelessness. So that's also a new initiative. That's one of those opportunities where we have sort of completed the initiative and then advanced it to some next level efforts. And that's really a neat thing because it has the opportunity to do some capital investment in different levels of housing that will be developed through a grassroots community engagement effort, particularly working with these individuals that are most impacted to figure out what it is that would be most helpful to them.
Now, how many of those criminals who've been actually arrested and charged, how many of those were actually homeless in 2021?
Unfortunately, that is data I do not have. I wish I did, but I do not have.
Now, going back, obviously, to, the impacts of diversion and deflection and obviously mental health and all those other things, with the police drop-offs, how much of those numbers dropped off in 2020?
They used other opportunities during COVID. They utilized, they could still do drop-offs to the main clinic over on Charlie Hall Boulevard.
Oh, yes.
They had embedded clinicians. They had the access to mobile clinicians. There was lots of different opportunities there. So while they weren't using the crisis center because they couldn't physically use it, they used the other tools in their toolbox. And the good news is they have other tools in their toolbox. That's a good thing.
Now, how has this deflection and diversion impacted the Charleston Dorchester Mental Health Center?
They are a really great organization. Like everybody, they have staffing issues these days. But they've pivoted, they've flexed, they've met the need. And I really, I encourage if anybody's interested to go to the CJCC meeting in July. It'll be a virtual meeting and hear the results of that study because that is, going to hopefully lead the way for some more work and more opportunities to help people in the future.
Now, where is the staffing issues inside that center, and where are the staffing issues inside the jail itself?
I don't have those numbers, but it's just a common trend these days is, to have staffing issues across the board, whether in any human service or law enforcement field. So that's why it's also important, that when we do look at what we're doing, we use our resources in the safest, most efficient, and most effective way possible. And I think that's really the point of the CJCC is to help look systemically where and how we can do that and how to work together to make that happen.
Yeah, and what was the most popular low-level crime in 2021 in Charleston County?
You keep asking me questions. I've got to go dig back.
That's just me. I love asking these follow-up questions.
Well, you can kind of see, we went from where simple possession of marijuana was by far the number one charge to where, that's not the case, right? We're looking at, the charges coming in, tend to be more serious. And that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's just the fact that we're not using it for less serious options. We're using it more, for more serious options. So you're still going to see some lower level stuff come in because it could be tied to a more serious crime. But a single charge only booking, for like simple possession marijuana, that doesn't happen near. It's more rare than it is, normal.
Now, Chris, let me ask you this. How many of those low-level crimes were actually tied to more serious crimes in 2021?
When we look, I'm just going to kind of rephrase this a little bit because there's a lot of activity, right?
Okay.
And if we look at the fine and reentry study that we commissioned, right?
Right.
We're looking, at all. This particular study looked over a pretty long period of time, and we did this with an independent researcher. And we're looking, in the study, for example, 93% of people released. 4.9% of those that released came back on a rearrest for a violent charge. 4.9%. 84% did just fine and had no issue at all. And then 11% that got rearrested for a nonviolent crime. So it's this, again, it's this small percentage and an even smaller percentage that gets rearrested on a violent crime. And those are the folks we need to do a better, more targeted response to. And that encompasses everything from the use of detention while waiting for court to moving them to court faster. And those are big issues that are going to require systemic solutions within Charleston County, but also across the state.
And let me ask you this. Okay, rearrested, obviously criminals. How many of those were actually in total in 2021?
It's too soon to say that because we're looking at, we want to have a sort of a set time from release that's consistent for everybody. So in this particular study, we saw 137 individuals out of, I want to say, out of 3,000, there were 137 people.
Wow. Now, how many absent regular reviews of the jail population were there in 2021?
The jail population review process, that happens weekly. And that's identifying folks who are, for example, sitting in jail on a bond of $1,000 to $5,000. That, maybe if they had the money, they'd be out. It doesn't include, looking at people in their charge with murder. That kind of a thing. And just keep in mind too, when I say violent crime, I'm talking statutorily violent.
Right.
So that could be everything from burglary to murder.
And speaking of courts, Kristy, how many missed court appearances were there last year?
Not many, because there weren't that many to miss. And that's actually an area where that is the data capture on that downtown at the court is actually improving. So I think that'll shift. But historically, as we have done this before COVID, during COVID, since COVID, or throughout COVID, what we see are rearrests happen a whole lot more than missed court.
Wow.
And a lot of that, keep in mind, we have a long time to disposition. So there's those, for the folks that, are living that lifestyle, who get arrested, they're not just going to magically stop. And if they get arrested again, we have, we talk about 137 people out of 3,000.
Right.
That's a great opportunity to do more good while not doing harm to the majority that do just fine. So we have to we have to find our way through this together.
And I know earlier you said there was going to be a shift. When do you expect that shift to happen?
Which shift?
Oh yeah, when obviously rearresting individuals, and obviously those who missed court appearances and all that stuff. you know, do you expect a shift to happen in those particular categories?
I hope that will happen. I hope, there are right now in the state of South Carolina, you can order a money bond or you can order a release on recognizance. That's it. There's not pretrial service options, to help ensure that people, make it to court and don't get rearrested. That's a big problem, especially when you're looking at 600 days median time to disposition. And not everybody, most people are going to be just fine, right? But those that aren't, we got to do a better job with, and we need options to do that. We have court reminders in Charleston County. That's a text message. Right. That's not going to stop somebody from committing crime. It's just going to remind them they have an appointment. So there's it's at least something, but we need a whole lot more than that. So that shift is a higher level policy conversation than Charleston County can do on its own. That's what I keep saying. We need a state level conversation about this, but it has to be focused and it has to be based in evidence. And Charleston County has a lot of that evidence to contribute to that conversation.
And I want to get you back on Quintin's close-ups because I want to talk to you more about pre-trial services and options there. But Zoom is only giving me less than a minute. But Kristy Danford, the project director for the Charleston County Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, thank you for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
And Quintin, this will be my last one. I have been the founding director for 7 years. I'm stepping down, and I am excited for the future of the CJCC. This is a great group, and I know they're going to do great things. So I'm going to keep on moving it forward and advancing safety and justice for everybody. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your service to this community.